Welcome to Life Stories, where real experiences come to life. Today, we dive into a shocking tale of family betrayal, manipulation, and the power of taking back control. Imagine being blindsided by the people you trust most, only to discover they've been using you for their own gain. This is the story of one woman's journey to uncover the truth, stand up for herself, and turn the tables on a family that thought they had all the power. Stay tuned, and let's begin the story today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more life-changing stories. I remember the exact moment I first felt that something wasn't right. It was a Sunday morning, and I was sitting in my living room sipping my coffee, scrolling through my phone when I saw a text message pop up from my sister-in-law, Julia. We had never been particularly close. In fact, I would describe our relationship as distant at best. Julia usually only texted me when she had a message from her mother or if she wanted to complain about something I had done. Never for any real conversation. So, when her name appeared on my screen, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The message was brief and blunt. We're having a small family gathering this Sunday at Mom's house. It's important. Be there at 3 p.m. It's a surprise. So don't tell Matt. Just show up. No, hope you can make it. No friendly greeting. Just a demand. I showed the message to my best friend, Claire, and she raised an eyebrow. That sounds weird, she said. Why wouldn't Matt know about it? I couldn't help but agree with her. Matt was extremely close to his family, especially Julia. If they were planning anything important, he would have been the first to know. But the fact that they hadn't told him raised a red flag. What could they possibly be planning that he didn't know about? I started to wonder if something had happened to someone, maybe a health issue or an emergency. I didn't want to worry Matt unnecessarily, so I made the decision not to tell him. I wanted to go and see for myself what was going on. That Sunday afternoon, I drove to my mother-in-law's house. It was a grand old place in a wealthy neighborhood of Charleston, South Carolina, one of those homes that felt cold and imposing, even in the summer heat. As I stepped inside, I immediately sensed that this wasn't going to be some casual family get-together. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Every member of Matt's family was there. His mother, his father, Julia, his two brothers, and even his aunt and uncle, who lived a few states away. They were all seated in the living room, forming a circle around a coffee table. The air felt suffocating, as though they were waiting for something to happen. I stood at the door, feeling the weight of their eyes on me. My heart began to race, but I refused to let it show. I crossed my arms and asked, "What's going on here?" Matt's father, Robert, picked up a folder from the table and slid it toward me. "We need you to sign these," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "It's for the best." My pulse quickened as I looked down at the papers. Divorce papers. I felt a brief wave of disbelief wash over me. "Are you serious?" I let out a breathy laugh. But it felt hollow. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. His mother, seated beside him, looked at me with a tight smile. "We've thought long and hard about this," she said, her words calculated and firm. "It's clear you're not a good fit for this family. You don't respect our traditions. You don't contribute the way a wife should. And you've been a distraction to Matt's future." A distraction? My mind struggled to process the words. I looked around the room at the faces of my in-laws. They weren't just suggesting that I leave. They were demanding it, as if they had the power to remove me from my own marriage. I couldn't hold back the laugh that bubbled up inside me. "Where is Matt?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "He's not here," he said. "He doesn't know about this yet. We're saving him from the stress." I raised an eyebrow. "So, let me get this straight. You've ambushed me. You've drafted divorce papers without Matt's knowledge. And you expect me to sign them, just because you say so?" His mother's smile tightened. "It's for the best," she repeated, her voice eerily calm. That's when I decided to show them my own surprise. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder of my own. "Actually," I said with a smirk, "I have a surprise for you too." The room fell silent. and all eyes were on the folder I had just tossed onto the coffee table. They stared at it, their expressions shifting from smug certainty to something more akin to fear. Robert was the first to reach for it, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. His face went redder with each page he read. What is this?" he stammered. I leaned in slightly, watching their faces twist in confusion and panic. "Proof," I said simply, letting the word hang in the air. Matt's mother grabbed the papers from him, skimming through them in disbelief. Julia snatched a page and gasped. "How did you?" I smiled, a sense of power beginning to swell inside me. "I've known for a while now," I said, meeting Julia's furious gaze. "I've just been waiting for the right time. And guess what? That time is now." As the tension in the room reached its peak, I realized that this moment was a turning point, not just for me, but for everything. The world as Matt's family knew it was about to come crashing down. And I was the one holding the wrecking ball. The room fell into a stunned silence as Matt's father continued to flip through the papers in front of him. His hands shook with a mixture of anger and fear. He couldn't hide his growing panic as the weight of the documents sank in. I could see it in his eyes. He knew exactly what they were. And that's what made him so terrified. This is fake," he muttered, trying to force his words out through clenched teeth. "There's no way you." But I wasn't fazed. "Oh, but I did," I said with a calmness I didn't feel. "And you just proved you recognize exactly what's in those documents. Otherwise, why would you be so scared?" The words hung in the air, thick with tension. I watched as Matt's uncle, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, reached over and snatched a page for himself. His eyes widened as he read through the document. "Robert, is this true?" he asked in a hushed tone, looking from the papers to Matt's father. Matt's father didn't answer. His jaw was clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. He didn't need to say anything, the guilt was written all over him. His mother sat frozen, her hands trembling as she set the papers down and looked up at me. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. You have no idea what you've done," she said, her voice trembling with fear. I didn't flinch. "Oh, I think I do," I said with a small, knowing smile. "You see, I wasn't just sitting around doing nothing. I was gathering all the pieces, carefully, over months. And now I've got everything I need." At that moment, the front door opened with a creak, and Matt stepped inside. His confused expression faltered when he saw the scene in front of him. His eyes darted from the divorce papers on the table to the folder I had just thrown down in front of his family. "What the hell is going on?" Matt's voice was filled with confusion. He stopped in his tracks, his gaze shifting between the people in the room, trying to make sense of the tension. His mother stood up quickly, a nervous smile on her face. "Matt, sweetheart, sit down. We can explain." I cut her off before she could finish. "No, Matt, you need to sit down," I said, my voice firm. "You'll want to hear this." I refused to give anyone the chance to control the conversation. I turned to Matt, and without hesitation, I dropped the bombshell that had been building inside me for months. "Your family tried to ambush me into signing divorce papers behind your back," I said, "but they didn't expect me to have my own paperwork." Matt looked at me in confusion, not fully understanding what I meant. His brow furrowed, and I could see the flicker of realization starting to form in his eyes. He stepped closer, and I opened the folder I had brought with me. "This," I said, tapping the papers on the table, "is everything I found over the past few months. Bank records, emails, hidden transactions. You might want to take a look." His expression shifted as he cautiously reached for the papers. As he flipped through them, his face drained of color. His breathing hitched, and I saw his hands begin to shake. He looked up at me with wide eyes. "Dad, what the hell is this?" His voice cracked with disbelief. Matt's father didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at the papers, his lips pressed tightly together. I could see the cracks starting to form in the family's carefully constructed facade. I didn't wait for his father to speak. I pointed to a specific document. is proof that your parents put our house up as collateral for one of their shady business loans. Matt blinked, his mind struggling to comprehend what I was telling him. No, that's not possible. His voice wavered, but I could see the cracks in his once unwavering trust in his family. I didn't let him go down that path of denial for too long. It gets worse, I added, my voice cold and unwavering. That loan defaulted, Matt. If I hadn't found out in time, we would have lost our home. His face twisted with disbelief and betrayal. His body seemed to tremble with the weight of the truth sinking in. You did what? His eyes were burning with betrayal as he turned to his father. The man who had always been his hero. But that image was shattering in front of him. I could see Matt's heart breaking. His world crashing down around him. He had spent so many years blinded by his family's manipulations. And now, the truth was staring him in the face. This was the moment he had been avoiding. But it was here now. And there was no escaping it. Your family set me up as the villain, Matt, I said, my voice steady and firm. They made me out to be a distraction while they drained you dry. And now that I know the truth, they wanted to get rid of me before I could tell you everything. Julia, who had been sitting in the corner, jumped to her feet. That's a damn lie, she shouted. Her face twisted in fury. But I didn't back down. I turned to her, calm and unbothered. Oh, are you sure about that? I asked, my tone challenging. I reached into my bag again and pulled out something else. A printed copy of Julia's messages. Maybe you'd like to explain why you were texting your friend about how easy it was to trick Matt into signing financial documents without reading them? Her face turned bright red. I didn't give her a chance to defend herself. I have screenshots. Julia, your conversations, your bank transfers, everything. I placed the documents in front of Matt. Your family isn't just entitled, Matt, they're criminals. The room was eerily silent now. The weight of the truth hanging over everyone. The family that had once seemed untouchable, perfect even, was crumbling in front of us. It wasn't just the betrayal that was crushing. They weren't just ruining Matt's future. They were actively destroying his past. Matt stared at the papers in front of him. His world unraveling. I could feel the tension in the air. This was a moment of no return. It was time for him to decide. Would he stay in this web of lies? Or would he finally see the truth? The silence in the room was suffocating, each breath heavier than the last. Matt stood frozen, staring down at the papers I had placed in front of him. His hands were trembling slightly, and his face was ashen. The weight of everything I had just exposed was too much for him to process all at once. But I could see the confusion, the betrayal, and the dawning realization in his eyes. Matt, I said, my voice quieter now, softer. They've been using you. They've been draining your accounts for years, pushing you to the edge. They used you as their piggy bank, covering their debts, their failed business investments, even Julia's own mistakes. I let the words sink in, giving him time to absorb it. His eyes flickered between the documents and his family, his face crumbling with each passing second. His shoulders slumped, the weight of his parents' betrayal settling heavily on him. This isn't possible, he whispered, his voice shaking. But I wasn't going to let him deny it. Oh, it's real, Matt, I said, the coldness in my voice cutting through the air like ice. And there's more. The house? The one we almost lost? It was collateral for one of their bad loans. You're not the only one they've been taking advantage of. Matt's lips trembled, his breath coming in short gasps as he flipped through the pages. His eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know what to say, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Why didn't I see this? I could feel his pain. I could see the shame creeping into his expression. But I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. This was the truth, no matter how difficult it was for him to hear. Because they've been controlling you, Matt. You've been blinded by their lies for so long. They painted me as the problem, the distraction, to keep you from seeing what they were really doing. The anger in Matt's eyes grew. He looked at his father, who was sitting still, as if frozen in place. His face red with fury. Robert, who had always been the pillar of strength, the figure Matt had looked up to, was now a shell of the man he once believed in. His mother, on the other hand, was clutching her hands together, her face pale, her lips trembling. She couldn't even look at him. Matt turned to me, his jaw tight with resolve. "What do we do next?" he asked quietly, the weight of the decision heavy in his words. I could see the clarity in his eyes now, a clarity that had been missing for so long. "First," I said, sliding a pen across the table toward him, "you sign my papers." He hesitated for a moment, his hands still shaking, but his eyes remained fixed on his parents, who were now staring at him with a mix of panic and disbelief. The power they once held over him was slipping away, and they knew it. Robert stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was furious, his face twisted in rage. "No," Robert growled, his voice deep and threatening. "You are not signing that." But Matt didn't flinch. He didn't look at his father. He didn't look at anyone except me. There was no turning back for him now. "I am signing it," Matt said, his voice steady, though his body trembled with the weight of the moment. "And after that, we're pressing charges. Fraud, identity theft, financial manipulation. I'm sure a forensic accountant will have a field day with this." Robert's face turned a deep shade of red, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think you can come into my house and threaten me?" he spat, his voice low and dangerous. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Not a threat, Robert," I said, my voice unwavering. "A fact." For a moment, it seemed as though Robert might explode. But before he could respond, Matt's mother stood up, her hands clasped together in a desperate gesture. "Matthew, honey, please," she pleaded, her voice quivering. "Think of everything we've done for you. Think of your family." Matt's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenched tightly. "You stole from me," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You lied to me. You nearly made me lose my home." He turned away from her, his heart breaking in real time. "I didn't ask for your help," he continued, his voice gaining strength. "I didn't ask you to control me, to manipulate me, and I don't need you anymore." His mother reached out for his hand, but he pulled away, his face hardening. The tears that had once been in her eyes were now replaced with fear. She saw, for the first time, that her control over him was over. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Julia, who had been quiet until now, looked like she might burst. She had been the golden child, the one who thought she could do no wrong. But now, with the full extent of the family's deception exposed, she was cornered. "What are you going to do when this is all over?" "Huh?" Julia sneered, her arms crossed defiantly. "Take him away from us and see how fast your life falls apart." I met her gaze, unfazed. "Is that so?" I asked, my voice calm but cutting. "You think I'm going to be the one who loses here?" I reached into my bag once more, pulling out yet another folder. "This," I said, tapping the folder against my palm, "is embezzlement." Julia's face went white as I threw the folder onto the table. I had the evidence, bank records, wire transfers, fake invoices, and in the middle of it all was her secret lover. "Derek." Matt looked at me, his eyes widening. "Derek, he's not just a friend," he murmured, his voice full of shock. I looked back at Julia, my smile growing as I saw the color drain from her face. "How does it feel, Julia?" I asked quietly. "To be caught? Not just stealing from your family, but funding your affair with money that should have gone to Matt?" The room held its breath, the world shifting around us. Matt was done. His family's empire was crumbling, and there was no way they could stop it now. As Matt signed the divorce papers, the weight of the moment felt both heavy and liberating. His eyes never left the documents, but his mind was far from his family. He was finally free, free from the manipulation, the lies, and the suffocating control that had held him captive for so long. The look in his eyes, the clarity that shone through, told me everything I needed to know. He was done with them. As he signed, I felt the last piece of the puzzle fall into place. This was the end of their reign. The end of their ability to control us. To manipulate us. To make us believe their lies. I grabbed his hand, and together we walked out of the house. Behind us, the chaos erupted. His parents were speechless, their world crashing down in a matter of minutes. Julia, furious and defeated, was left with nothing but her shame and the broken pieces of a life she thought she could control. But for me, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. It was about teaching them, and everyone else, that no one has the right to control you, especially not when you know the truth. As Matt and I left that house, I knew our lives would never be the same. We had endured the storm, and now, we would rebuild, we would thrive. Thank you for watching this life story. If you enjoyed the journey and the lessons it brought, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more life-changing stories. There's always more to learn, more to discover, and more to inspire. Stay tuned for the next chapter.